Welcome to Coverage and Coffee. My name is Casper Harsey. Joining me today is
Hi, Casper. I'm Aprameya G. I'm
uh,
a, I'm a risk engineer. I've been in the insurance industry for about 4 years now, and that's actually where we met.
yeah. So Aprameya and I were colleagues back in the day, working at an insurance brokerage. And today we are going to be talking about risk control, risk engineering. I know that where we work, that kind of terminology changed a little bit. So we'll kind of dive into what we're talking about or what this really means throughout this episode. It's also going to be a little bit of a catch up for us because we haven't spoken shop in a couple years, right? We haven't worked together directly, at least in a couple years. So it's going to be a little bit of risk control, a little bit of risk engineering. What does it really mean? Where does it kind of come into play? Yeah. Any initial thoughts? Actually, let's start with what do you think about insurance now that you've been in a couple of years, right?
Wow, that's a bit of a loaded question. Honestly, I think it's a bit of a running joke in the industry that no one expects to work in insurance, especially in Canada, where we for a while. Um, Now that I'm in the industry, I think there is so much to gain from it, especially in my
Yeah.
role. I mean, I've seen facilities and processes that no one our age would really get the exposure to. And I'm very grateful for that. It's a very social industry. You get to meet a lot of interesting people. Um, and it's interesting. I mean, we're going to talk about this later, but the perception of the industry is quite varied throughout the world. My personal experience is pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. That is something that I was going to address because we work together. We're obviously in London now. We worked together when we were in North America, right? And it's really interesting that phrase you said. I think we heard that a lot when we were in Canada. Like no one really picks insurance, right? They kind of stumble into it, right? And it ends up trapping people because it can get so incredibly interesting, right?
Yeah.
There's so many minutia details that end up being thrown into it. I think my first conference here, I said that line, and a British insurance broker was of a very much different opinion. And now I have met dynasties of people in insurance, right? Like their
Yeah.
great grandfather owned a brokerage, their parents owned a brokerage, they own a brokerage. It's actually three separate brokerages. It's not like an inheritance thing. They've just all been selling and creating brokerages.
Mhm.
So I guess it's a two-part question in the sense that do you see that difference here? And are there any other small, minute details that you may see differently?
Yeah, you're totally right. I've met people with dynasties, right? And it's interesting. I mean, you don't need a degree to work in insurance here. In fact, sometimes you don't need any sort of qualification. I know of someone who graduated from high school, immediately got into insurance because they
Yeah,
just
the
knew
apprenticeships.
exactly. And you start off with a title that doesn't really sound the best, like junior trainee or something like that.
Yeah.
But when you're 18 and you're fresh, it's almost like you're getting indoctrinated into the industry, and
Yeah.
and you can really build a good career in the UK, especially. I mean, it's whatever. It's a hub. It's where it was created. So you're totally right. I mean, just I think I'm going to be referencing Canada a lot,
Mm.
just because that's where the bulk of my experience has been. It's very different in Canada. I don't think we meet. Did you meet anyone at the company that we worked at who was fresh out of high school, full time job?
Well, I mean, it depends a little bit because I remember my first boss actually started as a typist. Now, I
Hmm.
don't know if they were fresh out of high school or not. I didn't ask that much, but I think there's always been quite a bit of career progression in insurance if you're willing to specialize, if you're willing to
Yeah.
find your niche, right? But I think in the UK there are just so many more options in terms of what those niches could be, right? Um, and before I kind of ask the follow up question, I guess let's quickly go over what is risk control, what is risk engineering,
Yeah.
what do you call it?
Either or, to be honest. My title is risk consultant, so it's kind of neither.
Okay, so risk consulting, I guess. But so the way that I've understood it is, in a one-liner, is that the risk engineers, the risk consultants, they bridge the gap between underwriting and what the on-site reality really is in terms of what does that risk profile look like. We've talked about this in other episodes, talking about the risk profile of a company, of the operations, and how they can differ. Right, you can have two companies who are competitors within their markets, but their risk profiles can be drastically different because of just physical risks, cultural risks, things like that. So they identify, analyze, and assess risks before the losses occur it's not just safety, it's understanding how does the risk impact insurance coverage and pricing, right? Because it's not necessarily that you're, an architectural risk engineer that comes in and says, okay, what does this project look like mathematically? Does it all check out? It is very much relative to the insurance. Does that kind of check out with your understanding, or what would your one-liner kind of be to define your role?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I like to think of it as there's three parts of my role that I think are core. The first one is going to a site, assessing the risk, and thinking about it from an insurance point of view. What can go wrong? What's the worst possible thing that can go wrong at the facility? And most of the time, that's fire, equipment risk, natural catastrophes, that sort of stuff. And the second part is writing the risk down in a report. So you visit the site and you consult with your client. And in the report, you mention what is happening at this facility, what are your process bottlenecks, and obviously you're familiar with this phrase, maximum foreseeable loss. That's a big part of the role as well. And then the third one is advocating for the client. So insurance engineers are sort of known for being very nitpicky, right? Obviously, I mean,
Yeah.
you wouldn't put money down for any facility out there. You would want to know every single thing about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, what happens is that me as a consultant, I need to advocate for my clients and push back on insurer questions or concerns that they may have. So, I mean, obviously, that's not a one-liner, but that's kind of what I summarize my role.
Yeah. There's the whole advisory piece that I don't think I gave enough credit for, because we've talked about this. Actuaries and underwriters, their job is to be nitpicky. Their job is to maximize premium, and then the broker's job is to advocate for the client and be able to ensure that the premium that they're getting is sufficient, but it's also priced accordingly. And then they can bring in experts like yourself who've been on site, right? Because the underwriter doesn't go on site, the broker doesn't go on site, they don't actually see these things, right?
Yeah.
That's where you come in and you kind of provide that color. What are we actually doing here,
Yeah.
right? Now, one of the things that I was very uncertain of was kind of the economics of risk control, right? Because we're talking about this advocacy thing, and in my one-liner, I kind of said, how can we look at how the risk translates to insurance coverage and insurance pricing, right? When we're talking about rate, when we're talking about what is the premium that they're actually paying at the end of the day. Do you see a lot of correlation between the advocacy you do to, does it ever directly decrease the premium? Or is it a lot of the time to kind of keep the premium the same almost, right? Like, can we curb these market controls, these market dynamics that are occurring? Reinsurance for NatCat is going down, so the price that they charge you is going to go up for NatCat. I know it's probably case by case, but
yeah. To be very frank, I think insurance premiums, like you've discussed many times on this podcast, are driven by reinsurance premium. What I do doesn't maybe directly reduce a premium, but like you said, it can flatten that. Our jobs is to create a story. When we're working at a brokerage, we need to create a story for the underwriters. And so a lot of the time we'll visit a facility, go back 2-3 years later, and track what's been happening on site to improve the risk. Now, I personally never say that, hey, if you do this recommendation, if you implement this recommendation, your premiums are going to go down, because I can't reasonably say that.
Yeah.
It's a bit tricky. Although, I mean, when you think about it on a very, very surface level, obviously, if your risk is lower, you should be charged a lower premium, but that's not always how it works. So it's it's a little bit complicated. It's a little bit nuanced, but I think more than anything, the way I picture my responsibilities is to really help the client, to use industry standards. I mean, there are a lot of people in my industry, in risk consulting or engineering, who've been in the industry for 50 years. You know what I mean? So they've seen facilities all over the world, different sizes, different methods, all of that stuff. And there's a lot of insight to be gained from talking to people. And that's one of the things that I try to tell people on site is that, hey, like, we have a team with hundreds of years of experience. We've seen that these things can go wrong at your facility. So I think it's a good idea for you to implement these things. But I never stress on the fact that it could cut their premiums. That's out of my scope.
Yeah. It's also a promise you don't really want to make, and then it ends up not happening. That's how you get unhappy clients at the end of the day. One of the things that you said that I use a lot in my job, I think I haven't perhaps used as much in the podcast as I should, but this kind of story that you're
Mhm.
telling, right? Because when I'm thinking about risk control and I'm thinking about stories, I'm thinking about, let's say we have a manufacturing facility that experienced a fire 3-4 years ago,
Mhm.
and they perhaps didn't have the best controls in place 3-4 years ago when this happened, right? They didn't have sufficient sprinklers. They weren't doing testing. They maybe didn't have a risk culture that gave them what to do when a fire occurs,
Mhm.
right? So when I'm thinking story, I'm thinking you guys are coming back there 3 years later and you're then gathering evidence that we have sufficient sprinklers. They do have good risk training. Everyone knows what to do. They do drills now.
Mhm.
They've got those airproof doors that close to like cordon off the fire between different sections of the facility. Is that kind of what you mean by story, or is it just kind of in general, a client has never had anything happen? Which one of those two stories do you think kind of comes up more, right? Like just the general, this is what their operations look like, or
Mhm.
this is what they've done to change their risk operations in the last couple of years?
I think it really depends on whether or not they have made big changes.
Mm.
So if they have made positive changes, it's crucial that we highlight those changes. In my experience, and this again sort of ties back into how the industry varies in different geographies. But if you're dealing with a mature geography like the UK, clients are more respectful, cognizant of the fact that the advice that we give is legitimate to an extent, and it's based on real data. When we look at other geographies, a lot of the time, clients and site managers are very focused on every day rather than what the insurance guy is telling them. You know what I
Mm.
mean? I mean, it's therefore more focused on process optimization. How do you get that last gold bar out of the facility? So when we're dealing with clients, a lot of the time, it's yeah, we want to craft the best story that we can, but it really depends on whether or not they've actually implemented our recommendations. And if they have, then yeah, absolutely, we'll stress that while staying completely factual. And if they haven't, then I mean, the most that we can say is that no changes have occurred since the last survey, right? And it's a relationship, it's a industry that's built on relationships, and your reputation matters a lot. So if I'm a risk engineer and I'm writing a report that has errors, everyone who reads that report, which is all the insurance underwriters and engineers, will know that they maybe cannot trust this report or the person that wrote this report for any
Yeah.
other.
So the next time you write it,
Exactly. So it's very important for us to be extremely factual.
yeah,
And I mean, obviously, you want to highlight the client's strengths, but you want to do that within reason.
yeah,
And so, honestly, my job is a lot of communication more than anything. I mean, it's important to know the technical aspect of things. It's very, very important to know the technical aspects of things. But yeah, communication, how you convey a risk, how you talk to your clients, and these are recommendations. We're not mandating that a client
mm,
does it. That's what the insurance companies will do.
yeah.
I mean, they might mandate you to put sprinklers in a building.
No, exactly. So, actually, on that point, because that was actually going to be my follow up question.
Mhm.
If, let's say, you go to a site and I guess it's a two-parter. How much of the policy do you know when you go there? Because let's say you go onto a site and you notice they don't have sprinklers, but it says that one of the warranties of the policy is that it's only in effect if they have sprinklers, right? Harsh and I actually spoke about this recently with a cyber policy where 2FA, right,
Yeah.
two-factor authentication was a mandatory. And because they didn't do it, they didn't get a payout. Is this something you would include in your report, or is something you tell them like on site, like, hey, what's going on here? Or is this kind of, nothing's changed since last time, right? Last time they didn't have it, they got the
Mhm.
policy, but no claim has occurred, right? Where does your role fall into those kinds of situations?
That's an interesting question. I think the insurance piece, the policy writing, the wording, all that stuff is very out of scope.
Okay.
The most that I would really need to know is from an MFL point of view, are they insured to their MFL or are they insured to a lot less than their MFL? Because that will make the biggest difference to how much insurance the client decides to buy from whatever the brokerage is or whatever the insurance company.
No, okay, that's fair. And I think it also helps you keep that level of like separation if you don't fully understand, not understand, but fully know the intricacies of the wording and everything, because it allows you to look at the risk separate from what is explicitly covered,
Yeah.
right? I have a couple different scenarios or like higher level topics that I think might fall under your purview. Some of them we already discussed before the podcast don't, but I still want to talk about them. But before we do that, there's one last part in the economics of risk control that kind of I got some differing answers when I was looking online ahead of this, which is who pays for this? Because it's either, it's included in the brokerage's commission, right? And this is a service they provide. They charge the client because, the client is doing a lot of changes all the time and, they don't want to keep sending risk engineers out to say, yes, they've done these changes. Or the underwriter does it because, we want this piece of business or portfolio. We've talked about this with Mo in the sense that when an underwriter has capacity, they want to deploy that capacity. When they're not deploying capacity, they're losing money. So they may, okay, well, we want this business. We want to show them that we want to work with this client. We'll pay for the risk engineer to go out. Is this all three? Is this?
Yeah, exactly. It could be any of those. A lot of the time we find clients are willing to pay for it.
Okay.
Which is interesting because we funnel the information that they provide and give it to the insurance companies. That's one of our value additions. And sometimes, like you said, I mean, an insurer might say, hey, here's a 3% bursary. Go do your risk engineering surveys as XYZ brokerage and come back to us with a report. And that really depends on the relationship that you have with the insurer as well, right? Because if they don't feel like you're going to give them a good product, they wouldn't give you the money to actually do the job.
Yeah. And going back to that reputational piece, do you ever see it that an insurer or an underwriter may request a specific engineer to go do it, right? Like they're like, okay, well, this guy, every single time we see a mining company, we see this guy's name on it. I want that guy to go do it because I have so many things on our actuarial model side to compare to, right? So I want that guy. Did you ever see that happen? Or is it just kind of company output is company output?
It's more company output is company output. But obviously, as a brokerage, let's say, so I specialize in mining, and there aren't a lot of mining engineers in the world, let alone in insurance. So if there's a mine site that needs to be visited, I would be the person that my company would pick to send to that facility. And then beyond that, it's up to me on whether I can actually write a report that's worth it for the insurers to read and trust. And if I'm not able to do that, then the insurers would simply reject the information in the report. So they don't have a lot of say in who the brokerage decides to send to site. It's more whether or not they would trust what they receive from the brokerage. And then, like I said, that will determine how much money they want to put down for the brokerage to conduct these services. And I just want to add a quick point that while I work at a brokerage, insurers have their own engineers who will often accompany me on sites. And depending on how experienced they are in the industry that we're visiting, they may or may not have pertinent questions, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I mean, that was something I heard a lot, right? Is when, when I was broking, also, within mining, I was working in the broking team there. Sometimes you meet underwriters or you meet insurance companies that do not know your specialty industry and they don't know how to ask the right questions, right?
Yeah.
I can imagine that translates to risk control as well and risk consulting. Sorry. So I said there were 3 overarching topics. I'm actually going to say that there's 4 overarching topics, and I'll let you pick. Isn't that exciting?
Very exciting.
We don't have to go through all of them because there's also a couple specific scenarios I want to go through. But overall, I want to kind of talk about the role within business interruption. So business interruption, for those who don't know, is, when a claim or an event occurs on your site, let's say a mine site, and it inhibits you from pursuing your business. Business interruption covers that those profits or that revenue that you lost during that time period. Regulatory requirements, because I'm actually not sure how it is here, but I know in Canada where we worked, insurance does not cover regulatory breaches. You can't get insurance that directly covers regulatory breaches, right? If you get fined for not following regulation, insurance kind of assumes. But I want to kind of hear how that is on site. Workers' compensation, which I know you don't have much experience with. This is more of a direct policy thing, and we just kind of clarified that that's not necessarily a part of risk consulting. And then the last part, which I love to talk about within risk profiles, is culture, right? And that kind of goes back to that what I was saying with the risk training, right? Or the people getting training on site. Do they have a positive culture, right? Because I've used this example a lot, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it because I don't know how genuine it actually is. But I've used this example a lot that two competing firms in the same industry, one can have a very toxic culture around risk, and one can have a very pro-risk culture, and that can completely change the results that you get when you do road shows, when you do site visits, things like that.
Yeah.
Those are the 4 topics. I think we'll tackle 2 or maybe 3 of them because there are some other specific examples I want to go through. But
okay.
Any thoughts?
Can you tell me again what the first topic was?
Business interruption, regulation, workers' comp, culture.
Great. Business interruption. So business interruption drives premiums in mining, especially.
Yeah.
When you think of a mine site, you're not dealing with a lot of combustible processes. I mean, there are some in mining that are pretty combustible, like if you're mining coal, and then there's a processing method called solvent extraction where you're basically dealing with large vats of kerosene, obviously super combustible. But in mining, a lot of the time, the risks that we focus on are things like process bottlenecks, equipment hazards, and those things will really drive business interruption. So business interruption, basically, site's been shut down, can't operate, you're not generating any revenue. What can you do to prevent that from happening? And that's kind of one of the crucial questions that I will ask at a mine site is, hey, you have a single line process. What happens if one of these equipment breaks down or something like that? Do you have spare parts? Do you have spare units entirely? And that goes beyond just the process itself. It also includes electrical things. So when you think of a mine site that's 1,000 kilometers from the nearest big city, you really need to make sure that things like water and electricity, basic
transmissions lines, sublimits. I remember that.
Yeah. Transmission lines, transformers, switch gears. These are all very crucial parts, especially these are big pieces of equipment. Transformers. I mean, I could get into super sort of nerdy details, but you really want to make sure that your largest pieces of equipment are either spared or maintained to an acceptable level. So I think that kind of tackles the business interruption piece.
Yeah. So just to bring it down to its most simple, scenario, let's say you have an open pit mine, you have a single excavator, and that excavator breaks, right? Business interruption would start to trigger while you get that replaced, right?
Yeah.
So the ways that you could mitigate that or show that you have a less risky risk profile is by having a backup, right? What's interesting about this is, there's the transformers, there's all these pieces of equipment, there's all these different lines. How much does the talent play into that, right? Let's say you only have one guy who knows how to run the excavator, right? In a business interruption case, let's not even say he got hurt. Let's say he just quit. He went somewhere else. Right? Is that taken into account at all?
I think that's an interesting question. Again, talent is not as difficult to come by as you would expect. You could find someone who can operate an excavator pretty easily, but it's also about whether or not they're actually willing to live in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And sometimes if they're experienced or if they're older, they'll have families. Are they willing to uproot their entire existence to come and work in northern Canada, alien territory? So that's a big part of it. So that's why mining pays well if you work in the industry, is because you need to incentivize people to actually come and work there. So yes, these people exist, but can you incentivize them to come and work at your facility? So a lot of camps on mine sites, camps are basically where staff live. They'll have gyms, they'll have these amazing cafeterias where you can basically eat whatever you want. And these are just little ways they incentivize people apart from compensation, obviously.
Yeah. So I remember when I worked on it, one of the sublimits I saw a lot was expediting expense and extra expense, right? So let's say your equipment does break down, you need to get something shipped in quickly. You get some money for expediting expenses, and extra expenses if you need to pay more to get it sooner, be on the top of that line. Is there anything like that for these employees, right? Like, let's say, yes, there is talent. There's people who are willing to work in mining, but you got to pay this guy an extra $200K from what you'd normally pay one of these guys, right? Is there anything in insurance that would come in and cover for that? Or is that outside the scope of risk consulting?
Yeah, I'd say that's outside the scope of risk consulting.
Yeah.
I mean, the information that I would collect is, how many people do you have on staff? And really, it's the equipment that matters more than the operator for my role. You you have, let's take the one excavator example. If you have just the one excavator and that piece of equipment has a year and a half lead time, so let's say it catches on fire, let's say it's, works on diesel or whatever, catches on fire, you're then down for 18 months and you can't operate because you've lost an excavator. And it sounds really trivial, right? I mean, it's a piece of equipment, surely you can replace it. But I don't think a lot of people understand the scale, like the size of these. I have pictures of me standing next to a haul truck where I'm not even the radius of the tire of the haul truck.
Yeah.
These are really, really big pieces of equipment with,
And
let's
in
say,
high demand.
very high demand, and let's say 4 maybe manufacturers globally. So you need to have it shipped out to you after it's constructed. So yeah, the operator piece is less core to my role, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you just keep increasing the amount of money you offer, you could probably get someone before 18 months, right? But
Yeah,
even if you pay someone a lot of money, they may not be able to get that truck faster to you, right?
exactly.
I guess this kind of, mostly because of my questions, gives a good transition to the culture piece,
Yeah.
right? And this is something that I always find incredibly fascinating, right? Because when you're looking at a risk profile, there's a lot of things you can put a 1 or a 0 on. Yes, it's true. No, it's not true. There's things you can put a monetary value on. How much does this excavator cost? How much
Mhm.
is it going to cost to replace? But when you're talking about like risk culture, that's more of a scale, right?
Yeah.
And then how do you ensure that two different risk consultants or two different brokers put the same company at the same place on the scale, right? Because you may put it at 0.2, out of 1, or you could put it at
Mhm.
0.9, really, really good risk culture. Is that something that you guys look at? Is that something, because I think I recall correctly that on road shows at least, and that's when the client will join the broker and try to wow and woo over some insurance underwriters, right? They will talk about culture. But is that something that you guys look at when you go on site?
I think what we find a lot of the time is that the site's risk profile itself is a reflection of the culture of the organization,
Yeah.
right? So let's take this transformer example or even the excavator example. If they know that it's an 18-month lead time piece of equipment, they would keep a spare or they would have a technician on site just in case something
Doing proper
happens.
maintenance. Yeah.
Exactly. So I've seen sites that are absolutely amazing. And when you look at who's running these companies, you can see that they've worked at 10 different companies, which have all done really well. So they know what can go wrong. But then I go to some sites and they have no idea what can go wrong. Maybe they're not as experienced. Maybe they just didn't think about it because they didn't have the right people at the right time. And I think culture is a very interesting thing. I mean, no one wants to run a company with a bad culture, right? But at the end of the day, I think it's about how much experience you have and how much are you willing to listen to people like me, not claiming to know everything, but I do know something.
Mm.
And the risk culture will sort of affect how they implement what I tell them to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, 100%.
Mm.
And I guess that probably connects back to the regulation piece, right? Are the leadership the type of people who are on the ball? They know what can happen. They know what their regulation looks like. Is that something that you guys look at, right? Like, let's say, I don't know if this is a case, but let's say you have a generator on site and it needs to be a certain level of filtration before it goes out to the atmosphere, or people need breaks at a certain amount of time. You're on site and you realize that everyone's working through lunch, right? Even though they're operating on heavy machinery. Do you guys ever look at these regulations or I mean, you've now worked in mining for a while. You probably
Mhm.
understand to some degree what regulation exists, but is that something that you guys are writing in your reports?
So there's 2 types of risk control.
Yeah.
Well, there's many types of risk control, but the 2 big ones are property and casualty or liability. So the workers' compensation thing you mentioned earlier, that's very much a liability thing.
Mm.
So in my team right now, we have property and liability. We have subject matter experts in those fields. So we'll have someone who specializes entirely in fleets. So fleets of vehicles, whether that's big trucks and excavators or just a bunch of haul trucks,
Mm.
right? So we have different types of risk control. I work in the property side of things. So yeah, I mean, I can't really comment on workers' compensation, but I have been to a site where an insurance engineer wants to collect both pieces of information.
Yeah.
And they do ask questions like this. What are your shifts like? How are you supporting your operators and things like that? And a lot of the time, it also boils down to the technical specifications of a piece of equipment. I've seen some pretty cool things in haul trucks, for example, where they will track the eye movements of the operator to see whether they're going to
Yeah.
fall asleep,
Yeah.
things like that. So there is a lot of innovation in the space as well, and that all sorts of ties back into the liability side of things. But yeah, I mean, I focus more on the property side.
I think we'll take that segue because the next topics I wanted to talk about is technology,
Hmm.
right? So, 100% these haul trucks have this, right? Long distance truckers on normal roads, they have these eye tracking equipments. They also start getting these assistive pieces of equipment, and I guess that I'm gonna just name a few, and then I have some examples of each, but I'll just kind of drop them all at once and
Sure.
give your thoughts on them. Um, I saw these types of technology like, I mean, obviously, like I said, its core. Having a sprinkler system is a form of technology, right?
Hmm.
The little vial breaks under heat, and then water comes down, right? But then there's water detection things, right? Like these sensors that'll detect moisture in places there's not supposed to be
Hmm.
sensors. There's these, I saw these for tailings dams actually, these in ground sensors that you insert into the mound of the tailings dam. And then it looks at, is there stuff seeping through?
Yeah.
Is there a lot of movement that could break the integrity of this dam? Drone technology, right? In terms of, we've spoken about this where, your roof is perhaps out of date. So they send a drone out. Does it actually look like it's been updated
Hmm.
recently? And satellite technology, right? In terms of, let's look at the mine site from above. We can take pictures at different times. Are they actually doing maintenance? Are they doing these things that they say they're doing?
Hmm.
I guess my two thoughts are, one is a very loaded big question. Do you see a point where technology could come and do your job, right? Perhaps not the interpretation piece, right? But actually going on site, some dude with a camera, you've seen those dogs from Boston Dynamics with the 360 cameras on, they just
Right.
walk around site. And do you use any of this type of technology, right, when you're writing your reports, when you're doing your site visits?
Good question. I personally don't. I think there is room for insurance in general to catch up with whatever the latest piece of technology is out there. But interestingly, a lot of more advanced mining sites for their tailings dams will use satellite imagery, and they will track how, let's say you have a dam, how is that dam moving, if at all, right? And just like you mentioned, we there's piezometers which track pressure at different points, basically looking at where is this dam going to collapse. So there is a lot of embedded technology in mining that we in insurance now sort of leverage in order to ask questions and get information. Um, whether or not drones can replace my job, I hope not. But I think when we're not able to go to a site, it's kind of like a last resort where we would ask someone to take pictures for us. But I think it's important to state that it will be viewed exactly how it was conducted, if you know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
when we go to site, we're looking at everything. Someone takes a picture and sends it to us from one angle, that's maybe 10% of the entire story, right?
Yeah.
We look at what's above a piece of equipment, around it.
Yeah.
Storage is a big, big deal in risk control. I mean, I obviously work predominantly in mining, but now I'm starting to do a lot of manufacturing and warehouses where fires happen. And how are you storing your things on racks? How are your sprinklers positioned on these racks, if at all? Are the racks grated? Because I'll give this example. If you have a sprinkler system above many aisles of racks and those racks are solid, sprinklers go off, but the water isn't actually going to reach the fire if the racks aren't graded, if they're
Yeah.
solid. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So these little things, it's very difficult to sort of guide someone to take pictures of these things. Now, if you're controlling the drone yourself, you may as well just go there. Do you know what I mean? You want to talk to people as well. I think a big part of the role, apart from just looking at things, is actually talking to people,
Yeah.
understanding management programs and that sort of thing. And yeah, I mean, you could do it virtually, I guess, but it's always better to do these things in person. I've found. I think there's obviously a lot of value in doing things virtually. It saves time, it's efficient. But to get a really in depth look, you want to go and talk to people, and you.
Yeah.
I think,
But
yeah.
if we go back to that storytelling piece you said, do you not see how perhaps some of this technology could help you with that storytelling aspect, right? If we talk about, there was a company that I spoke with, I think it's called 3DI. It's a London, India-based insurance brokerage. And what they do is that they take these 360 cameras when they do their site visits. They take 360 cameras all along them, all well with them, and they give this interactive link for the underwriter so they can hop on and walk around this place, kind of like Google Maps
Mhm.
when you go from point to point, right? Um, Now, that's not a silver bullet, right? They're probably not going to go into every single room, but let's say you supplement your risk report with drone shots from different times of the year. You supplement it with sensor data that shows how this stuff fluctuates over time, right? So you can say, yes, we had higher pressure in the tailings dam in this time, but it was winter, and the frost ends up compacting the soil type thing. Is that something that you think could be helpful in your storytelling, or?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you've kind of nailed it there. I don't think it's ever going to replace us, but it's going to support us pretty significantly.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing a lot of different scenarios here. Chubb using something called Streamlabs to detect water detection, right? And then I don't know if you remember this in Canada or if you did a lot of driving, but like different auto insurers would give you a discount on your premium if you were willing to put this little thing in your car that tracked your driving habits, things like that, right? So that kind of gives me that vibe a little bit.
Yeah.
A company called Dronotech uses drone mapping. So they do like 3D scans, and they do like mapping of the topography of the
Hmm.
soil and the place to help provide more color for vacation homes actually, right? So are you near a cliff, right? Do we want to send someone out to, what's a British vacation area? Cornwall, right? Do we want to send out an engineer to Cornwall to every single vacation home that people have? Maybe not. Um, and Even, I mean, there's even mining examples here, right? Where Caterpillar is using something called MineStar Command, which seems to be some sort of wireless monitoring system, right? So rather than having supervisors on the site, they have people in a central place, almost like, I guess, air traffic control for mine sites, right?
Yeah.
Do you see? So my initial question was whether you guys use this technology,
Hmm.
and you currently don't. You do hope that it catches up, and you do see how it could help supplement the value that you provide. Do you see your clients using this a lot, either for operational purposes or insurance purposes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look into mining, one of the big topics is tailings. Tailings, for those who don't know, is where you store the waste material. So you break a rock, make it pretty fine, and then you process it, and then you're left with all the rock that isn't what you were looking for. And a lot of the time, that's in a slurry form. So water and maybe some chemicals, right? So you have to store all of this material in a large dam. And Brazil, especially, is a country where tailings disasters have caused a
Yeah,
lot of environmental damage, a lot of scrutiny, obviously, and loss of life. Even it's extremely important that clients focus on this thing. So, I've been out there and I've seen remote locations monitoring the movement of tailings dams. And it's alarmed. It informs all sorts of government agencies if something wrong happens. So there, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of innovation in mining, even in the mining method itself. There's facilities out there who are freezing the ground itself so that you don't have too much water entering a mining stope. There is so much innovation happening in mining right now. I mean, obviously, with gold prices where they are, there's a lot of money going into the industry. And a lot of mining companies, from my understanding, are now focusing more on how to be more efficient. Divestitures are happening in the industry quite a lot. There's some rumors of Barrick Gold. I mean, I just saw this on the news, maybe splitting up into two companies so that they can be a leaner organization. They can focus on different geographies. Some are safe, some are less so. So there's a lot of innovation happening in the industry. Companies want to pour money into it. Autonomous haul trucks is a big thing. We were just talking
yeah,
about operators. There's a huge possibility that we won't need any operators ever again. And that's because of autonomous haul trucks. These trucks will be remotely operated or just do their own thing.
yeah. Now, I know you're not an expert on the technology, building these things yourself, but do you think that within your career time frame, you'll see a mine site that doesn't have a single person on it? Because you're thinking about a lot of the things that goes on here. Obviously, I don't think we're going to get to a point where robots can do like technician type work,
Mhm.
maintenance type work. You'll fly someone in, they'll lubricate all the machines, they'll screw all the bolts on type thing. I don't think we're getting into that XAI robot where that does your laundry anytime soon. But if we're talking about trucks, we're talking about big pieces of machinery. Maybe not some of this underground mining, but let's say an open pit mine in Germany, for example, doing coal. Right? They are just digging up big chunks. They're putting it on trucks. They're throwing it on a sorter, and it processes the minerals, right? Do you think in your career time, we'll see a fully autonomous mining site?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I mean, I can picture a fully automated mine site because I feel like anything can really be done by a robot controlled by a human from somewhere else. But in my lifetime, I highly doubt it.
It's interesting. It's interesting because I mean, as we're kind of approaching the end of the podcast, we can kind of put on our outrageous hats because I'm thinking like space travel type stuff, right? Like if you develop something locally here, once again, I'm not expecting you to know the final answer here. This is when we just get into the back and forth part of the podcast. But yeah, no, I think there's I mean, we've said this so many times in this podcast. There's so many factors about insurance that are so hard to understand when you're just looking at it from a surface level, right? Most people's relationships with insurance are just so one way, or there's two dynamics that they have with it. They either get paid out following something really bad happening to them, or they don't get anything and they feel like they paid their premium for nothing. But when you dive into insurance, especially on a commercial lens, you realize how essential it is for these operations to exist, right?
Yeah.
If a mining company had to put this money aside for a rainy day that insurance now covers, they wouldn't be able to scale to the same size or do the same level of work that they do now.
Yeah, I completely agree. When you look at a mine site, they're always exploring, they're always looking to expand, and you need money for that. And if you have insurance, you don't need to put all of that money aside for a rainy day, like you said. And I think your question also ties very well into the perception of insurance in different geographies. In the UK, it's a very mature market, right? Like we already discussed. I mean, I go to clients and I can see that the way they approach the entire insurance process is just a lot more informed and a lot more enthusiastic, to be honest. I mean, I don't know if you experience this in Canada, but insurance in Canada is not really treated like something essential. It's almost treated like a necessary evil. And it's very different in the UK. I'm curious as to what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the conversation is entirely different. I haven't had as much client-facing opportunities as you have, or people who are buying insurance as you have. I have had a handful, but it is a lot more sophisticated. And I think it probably also just comes from the fact that there are so many people centered in one place working on insurance, right? So someone who works in insurance, and that guy is a reasonable guy, right? But if we go back to it, if you work at a company in Canada, you're only likely. It's also a very different culture around insurance, right? And not even on a personal lines basis, right? In the US and Canada, there's a lot of insurance agents who do not have the same regulatory requirements to see your best interests, right? They are the guys trying to spew out capacity as much as possible. It's not quite the same here. A lot of the work that US agents would do in the UK is automated, right? There's so many sites where you just go on and you're already plugged into the actuarial models. Personal lines insurance is actually very smooth here. So I think it's such a multi-tiered reasoning why we get to this, right?
Absolutely. And I think the crucial difference also is that when someone hears insurance, they think health, auto, life, things that can be quite irritating, for the lack of a better word, for an individual to deal with. But when you look at large facilities and insuring property and insuring things like that, it's a very different conversation. And I think in a mature market like the UK, people understand that. And it's not, again, I'm not trying to hate on Canada or anything like that. I mean, it's an amazing country. I had a lovely time working in the Canadian insurance industry. But yeah, I think it is a crucial difference. When I go to site, I make it pretty clear that I'm not an insurance guy. I work adjacent to insurance. I work at a brokerage, and our job is to advocate for the client. We're on the client's side, quote unquote. So having to make that distinction is a lot more important in less mature markets than it is in more mature markets.
Yeah. Yeah, no, really appreciate you hopping on today, Aprameya. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's really nice to have a subject matter expert, or at least someone who knows, who has, I guess, been on the front lines and kind of deals with this on a daily basis. Is there anything you think we might have missed within this kind of risk consulting, risk engineering, right?
Yeah, I think without sort of tooting my own horn, I think it's important for anyone to sort of give credit where credit's due and not make assumptions based on the fact that it's insurance adjacent. I think a lot of the time I've dealt with clients who don't reply to my emails. You know what I mean? And obviously it might just be me, but I don't think it is. I think it's just an attitude towards insurance and risk mitigation in general. Things are given different priorities by different people, obviously. But I think just to end this, I think I would also say that what I'm able to do is not just a sort of singular thing. There's multiple aspects to my role. And also, when you work for a large organization, I have a team full of people who are experts in what they do. And that's not just risk control. There's strategy, there's actuaries, there's all these different resources that can be sort of pulled upon. And yeah, I said I won't be tooting my own horn, but I think I've done that a little bit. But yeah.
And that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. We really appreciate you coming on here today. I do think we're going to be wrapping it up now. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's always great to see you, Aprameya. Hopefully we can, work again sometime together in the future. But thanks for listening today. This has been Coverage and Coffee. My name is Casper Harsey.
Thanks a lot, Casper. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.